I still remember the exact moment I decided to destroy my brother. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, not some big fight where we threw punches and screamed terrible things at each other. It was quieter than that, more insidious. I was standing in the doorway of our parents' living room during Christmas dinner 4 years ago, watching everyone laugh at one of Nathan's jokes, and something inside me simply broke. For 32 years, I had lived in his shadow. For 32 years, I had been the other Webb brother, the one who was fine, the one who was doing okay, the one whose accomplishments were politely acknowledged before the conversation inevitably swung back to Nathan's latest triumph. And in that moment, watching the way our mother looked at him like he was the sun itself, I made a decision that would cost me everything I claimed to want. I'm telling this story now because my brother deserves to know the truth, even if I'm too much of a coward to tell him face to face. I'm telling it because I've spent 2 years living with what I did, and the weight of it is crushing me. And I'm telling it because maybe, just maybe, someone listening to this is standing at the same crossroads I stood at, and they need to know what waits at the end of the path I chose. My name is Marcus Webb, and I used my brother's secrets against him to get ahead. Not just once. Not in some moment of weakness I can blame on alcohol, or anger, or temporary insanity. I did it systematically, deliberately, over the course of 18 months. I watched him fall, and I told myself he deserved it. I was wrong. About everything. Nathan is 3 years older than me, which meant that for my entire childhood, he was always ahead. He walked first, he talked first. He learned to ride a bike, throw a ball, read a book, always first. By the time I reached any milestone, it had already been done, already been celebrated, already been recorded in our mother's careful handwriting in the baby books that chronicled our early years. I don't blame my parents for this. They loved me. I know they did. But there's something about the firstborn child that captures a family's imagination in a way subsequent children simply can't replicate. Nathan was the one who made our parents into parents. He was the one they learned on, worried over, photographed obsessively. By the time I came along, they had figured out that babies don't break as easily as you'd think, and the camera came out less often. It's such a cliché, isn't it? The younger sibling, jealous of the older one, desperate for attention. I hate how predictable my psychology turned out to be. I spent years in therapy trying to convince myself I was more complicated than that my motivations were nuanced and understandable. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was jealous. I was jealous from my earliest memories, and that jealousy grew into something toxic that I never learned how to uproot. Nathan wasn't just older than me, he was also better. That's not false modesty or distorted perception. It's objective fact. He was smarter, at least in the ways that showed on tests and report cards. He was more athletic, the kind of kid who made varsity teams as a sophomore, while I struggled to make JV as a senior. He was charming in a way that seemed effortless, the kind of person who could walk into any room and leave with 5 new friends. And the worst part? He was nice about it. He wasn't arrogant or condescending. He genuinely seemed to want me to succeed, would help me with homework, and introduce me to his friends, and defend me from anyone who tried to mess with his little brother. He was, by every measure that matters, a good person. I hated him for that too. You'd think that kind of resentment would fade as we grew up. You'd think that becoming adults, building separate lives, finding our own paths, would dissolve the sibling rivalry of childhood into something more manageable. For some people, maybe it does. For me, it only got worse. Nathan went to Stanford. I went to a decent state school that no one had ever heard of on the coasts. Nathan got recruited by a major tech company before he graduated. I spent 6 months after graduation applying to jobs that never called back. Nathan rose through the ranks with the kind of meteoric trajectory that gets written up in business magazines. I clawed my way into mid-level positions at companies that were always one bad quarter away from layoffs. We were both in tech. That was the twist that made everything possible. If we'd gone into completely different fields, I might never have had the opportunity to do what I did. But we were both in software, both in the Bay Area, our professional circles overlapping just enough to make comparison inevitable. By our late 20s, Nathan was a VP at one of the big players. I was a product manager at a startup that kept pivoting its business model because nothing was working. Our parents would call me with updates about Nathan's latest promotion, his latest equity package, his latest feature in TechCrunch, and I would clench my jaw and say how happy I was for him. I wasn't happy. I was dying inside, a slow death by 1,000 cuts of comparison. The night I made my decision, that Christmas dinner, with Nathan holding court at the head of the table, something shifted in me. I realized that I had spent my entire life waiting for things to even out, waiting for some cosmic balancing where my time would come and Nathan would fade into the background. But that wasn't going to happen. Nathan was always going to be ahead, always going to be the golden child, unless I did something about it. I didn't know what that something would be, not yet, but I started paying attention in a way I never had before. I started watching Nathan more closely, listening more carefully, filing away information that might someday prove useful. It took almost a year for my opportunity to appear. The startup I was working at finally ran out of runway and shut down in early 2020, right before the world fell apart. I was unemployed for 2 months, burning through savings and trying not to panic, when Nathan called me out of nowhere. His company was hiring. They needed people, and he knew I was looking. And would I be interested in interviewing? I should have said no. Every instinct I had screamed that working at the same company as my brother would only make the comparison worse, would put me directly in his shadow in a way that couldn't be avoided. But I was desperate. I had rent to pay and prospects that were drying up by the day. So I said yes. The interview process was rigorous. Nathan made clear he wasn't going to pull any strings for me, that I would have to earn the position on my own merits. And I did. I got the job based on my skills and experience, and for a brief moment, I felt something like pride. I had made it into the company on my own terms. Then I arrived for my first day and learned that I would be on Nathan's team. Of course, I would be. The universe had a sense of humor after all. Nathan was careful to treat me exactly like any other employee. No favoritism, no special treatment. In some ways, he was harder on me than on others, overcompensating for our relationship. I understood why he did it, and I even respected it. But it meant that every day I sat in meetings where my older brother was the one running the show, the one making decisions, the one everyone looked to for guidance. I was 32 years old, and I was still living in his shadow. The company had transitioned to remote work because of everything happening in the world, which meant that most of our interactions happened over video calls and Slack channels. But there were occasional in-person meetings for senior staff, meetings that, as a new hire, I wasn't invited to, or I wasn't supposed to be. Nathan's apartment was 15 minutes from mine. We had chosen our places to be close to each other, back when I still believed that proximity might help us become actual friends instead of just brothers. One evening, about 3 months into my tenure at the company, he asked me to come over and help him troubleshoot an issue with his home network. His internet had been cutting out during important calls, and I had always been the more hands-on tech person between us. I went over, fixed the issue in about 20 minutes, and was about to leave when Nathan got a call. He excused himself to take it in his home office, leaving me alone in his living room. I should have just waited. I should have scrolled through my phone, or looked out the window, or done anything other than what I actually did. But Nathan had left his laptop open on the coffee table. I don't know what made me look. Maybe some part of me was already searching for ammunition, even if I didn't consciously realize it. Maybe I was just curious about what my brother's digital life looked like from the inside. Whatever the reason, I glanced at the screen and saw his email inbox, still visible and unprotected. My eyes caught a subject line that made my breath stop. Situation with Mitchell. Confidential. I knew a Mitchell at the company. Mitchell Reeves, one of the other VPs. He and Nathan were peers, competitors for the same advancement opportunities. There had been rumors about tension between them, whispers of some kind of conflict that nobody would discuss openly. I looked toward the hallway where Nathan had disappeared. I could hear his voice, muffled, still on the call. I clicked on the email. What I read in those few stolen minutes changed everything. The email was from Nathan to one of the company's lawyers. It was a detailed account of an incident that had happened years earlier, before I joined. An incident where Nathan had made a significant error that cost the company a major client. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was that Nathan had, at the time, blamed the error on someone else, on a subordinate who had been fired as a result. The email was Nathan confessing this to the lawyer, apparently seeking advice about whether to come forward now that the company was facing a lawsuit from the wrongfully terminated employee. The lawyer's response was clinical and damning. If Nathan's role in the incident came to light, it would likely end his career and expose the company to additional liability. I heard Nathan's footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the email, stepping back from the laptop just as he emerged from his office. "Sorry about that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Client emergency. You heading out?" I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. "Yeah, I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow. Thanks for fixing the network. I owe you one." I smiled and said something about no problem. Family helps family. And the whole drive home, I thought about what I had seen. Nathan had let an innocent person take the fall for his mistake. Nathan, the golden child, the perfect one, had done something unforgivable and gotten away with it. And I was the only one who knew. For weeks, I did nothing with the information. I told myself I was processing it, deciding how to feel about it, figuring out what my brother's revelation meant for my understanding of who he was. But really, I was planning. Some part of my brain was already running calculations, seeing possibilities, mapping out paths that might lead to my own advancement at Nathan's expense. I hated that part of myself, and I listened to it anyway. The company was in the middle of a reorganization. Several VP positions were being consolidated, and there were rumors that only one or two of the current VPs would survive the transition. Nathan was considered a lock to keep his position. He was too valuable, too successful, too well-liked to be cut. But what if that changed? What if something came to light that made him look less golden? I started laying groundwork. Nothing overtly malicious, just subtle mentions in conversations with senior leadership about the old client situation. Careful questions about what had really happened. I positioned myself as someone who was simply curious about company history, eager to learn from past mistakes. But I was planting seeds. I was making sure that when the time came, people would be primed to believe the worst about my brother. The problem was that I needed more than just the old story to take Nathan down. The email I'd seen was about something that had happened years ago. By itself, it might damage him, but it probably wouldn't destroy him. I needed more. So I started looking. I'm not proud of what I did next. In fact, I'm so ashamed of it that I've never told anyone the full extent of my surveillance, not even the therapist I've been seeing since everything fell apart. But this is a confession, and confessions require honesty, even when honesty is excruciating. I became obsessed with finding Nathan's secrets. I started watching his calendar, noting meetings that seemed unusual. I paid attention to when he was online late at night, wondered who he was talking to and why. When we had family gatherings, I would find excuses to look at his phone if he left it unattended, scanning through messages and photos for anything that might be useful. I was patient. I had learned patience from watching Nathan succeed. Rushing never worked, and the people who played the long game were the ones who won. I told myself that I was just gathering information, that I might never actually use any of it. I told myself a lot of things. Over the next 6 months, I discovered more than I had ever expected. Nathan, it turned out, was not as perfect as everyone believed. His golden image concealed cracks that ran deep. I found out he was struggling with debt, significant debt that he had hidden from our parents, from his colleagues, from everyone. The lifestyle he projected, the expensive apartment and the nice car and the generous gifts at holidays, was largely funded by credit. He was leveraged to the point of instability, one missed payment away from everything falling apart. I found out he was taking medication for anxiety, which wouldn't have mattered to most people, but might matter to a company evaluating which executives to keep in a reorganization. Mental health issues were still stigmatized in our industry, especially at the senior level. It was wrong, but it was also reality. And I found out about Meredith. Meredith was a woman at another company in our industry. I discovered her existence through Nathan's personal email, another boundary I crossed, using a password I had seen him type during one of our remote family dinners. He was having an affair with her, had been for almost 2 years. Nathan was married. His wife, Caitlin, was one of the kindest people I had ever met. They had been together since college, had built a life together, had talked openly about starting a family soon, and all while presenting this picture of marital happiness, Nathan had been sleeping with someone else. I sat with that information for a long time, trying to figure out how it made me feel. Angry, certainly. Caitlin didn't deserve to be treated like that. But also something else, something that felt shamefully like satisfaction. The golden child had tarnished himself. The perfect brother was a fraud. Now I had what I needed. I didn't act immediately. I was still playing the long game, still telling myself that I might never actually use what I had discovered. But the reorganization was accelerating, and rumors started circulating that the final decisions about which executives would stay were being made within weeks. I made my move on a Tuesday. It started with a carefully worded anonymous email to HR, expressing concerns about Nathan's judgment and referencing the old client situation. I didn't include any details that would point directly to me, just enough to prompt an investigation, to get people asking questions. 3 days later, I had a casual lunch with one of the senior executives who would be making the reorganization decisions. I mentioned, as if it had just occurred to me, that I had heard Nathan was under a lot of stress lately, that I was worried about him. I expressed hope that the company was taking care of its people, that mental health support was available for those who needed it. I was painting a picture. Each brushstroke was small enough to be deniable, but together they were creating an image of Nathan as unstable, unreliable, hiding things. And then, a week later, I played my final card. I called Caitlin. I told myself I was doing her a favor. She deserved to know the truth about her husband. But I knew, even as I dialed her number, that my motivations were not pure. I knew that if Caitlin confronted Nathan, if his personal life exploded, it would ripple outward into his professional life. People would talk. His focus would shatter. His carefully maintained image would crack. I called Caitlin and told her about Meredith. I told her I was an anonymous friend, someone who cared about her and couldn't stand to see her deceived. I gave her enough details that she couldn't dismiss it as a prank. Times, places, things I had learned from Nathan's emails. Then I hung up and waited. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Caitlin confronted Nathan that same night. He denied it at first, then broke down and admitted everything. She moved out the following morning, went to stay with her sister, and by the end of the week, everyone at the company knew that Nathan Webb's marriage was imploding. That same week, HR completed their investigation into the old client situation. With the anonymous tip providing direction, they had found what they were looking for, documentation that contradicted Nathan's original account, evidence suggesting he had misdirected blame. The wrongful termination lawsuit suddenly had new ammunition, and Mitchell Reeves, Nathan's rival, was all too happy to share his own concerns about Nathan's judgment and stability with anyone who would listen. The reorganization announcement came on a Friday afternoon. Nathan was not among the executives who retained their positions. In fact, he wasn't just demoted, he was placed on administrative leave, pending a full review of his conduct. I watched the announcement email arrive, saw Nathan's name conspicuously absent from the leadership list, and I felt a rush of triumph that disgusted me even as I savored it. I had won. I had taken down the golden child. I had proven that I could compete and emerge victorious, and it took me almost a week to realize that I had won nothing at all. The thing about revenge, about tearing someone else down to build yourself up, is that it doesn't actually give you anything. I had expected to feel validated when Nathan fell. I had expected the comparison to finally shift in my favor, for our parents to look at me the way they had always looked at him, for my own accomplishments to suddenly seem more significant in the absence of his shadow. That's not what happened. What happened was that our mother called me, crying, asking if I knew what was going on with Nathan. She was terrified for him, not disappointed in him, not judging him, but scared. Her older son was falling apart, and she didn't know how to help him. What happened was that I saw Nathan at a family dinner 2 weeks after the announcement, and he looked like a different person. The confidence was gone, the easy smile, the warmth that drew people to him. He was hollow-eyed and silent, pushing food around his plate, while our father tried to make conversation. What happened was that Caitlin filed for divorce, and I had to sit through a phone call with my mother, where she mourned the grandchildren she had been hoping for, the daughter-in-law she had loved, the future that had been ripped away. I had done this, all of it, and I couldn't tell anyone. The guilt started slowly, like a leak I could ignore if I didn't look at it directly. But it grew. It pooled. It began to flood the rooms of my mind that I had tried to keep clean. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake at night, replaying everything I had done, trying to find justifications that still held up in the darkness. They didn't. In the bright light of my ambition, I had convinced myself that Nathan deserved what I was doing to him. But in the quiet of the night, I knew the truth. I had destroyed my brother's life, not because he deserved it, but because I wanted what he had. I started drinking more than I should. Not enough to interfere with work, but enough to notice, enough to worry about. I was self-medicating, trying to drown the voice in my head that kept asking, was it worth it? Are you happy now? And the answer, every time, was no. The cruelest irony was that my own career didn't benefit from Nathan's fall the way I had expected. Yes, I was promoted in the reorganization. I moved from product manager to senior product manager, a step up, but not the leap I had imagined. No one saw my brother's destruction and suddenly recognized my brilliance. I was still just Marcus, Nathan's younger brother, competent but unremarkable, except now I was also the brother of Nathan Webb, the disgraced former VP who had lied about a client situation and was going through a very public divorce. The name recognition I had gained was not the kind I wanted. The company's lawsuit with the wrongfully terminated employee settled out of court for an amount that was rumored to be substantial. Nathan's role in the situation was kept quiet. The company wanted to avoid publicity, but he was finished in the industry. Whisper networks move fast in tech, and within months, everyone knew that Nathan Webb was not to be hired. I watched my brother spiral. He moved out of his expensive apartment and into a small rental in a worse neighborhood. He stopped returning calls from friends. When I saw him at family gatherings, which became increasingly rare, he looked diminished, like someone had let the air out of him. Our parents aged 5 years in 6 months. Our mother developed health problems that her doctors attributed to stress. Our father grew quieter, more distant, as if the family he had built was crumbling in ways he couldn't understand or fix. And I knew that I had done this, that every crack in our family's foundation could be traced back to me. I considered confessing dozens of times during that first year. I would craft speeches in my mind, imagining how I would explain what I had done and why. But every time I got close to actually saying the words, I chickened out. The consequences were too severe. If people knew what I had done, I would lose everything. My job, my family, maybe even my freedom, if Nathan chose to pursue legal action. So I stayed silent, and the guilt continued to grow. The thing that finally broke me was a phone call from Nathan, 18 months after his fall. He called me late on a Sunday evening, his voice rough and tired. He said he wanted to talk, just the two of us. He said there was something he needed to tell me. We met at a diner near his apartment, one of those all-night places where lonely people go to drink coffee and stare at their reflections in dark windows. Nathan was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of tea that he hadn't touched. I sat down across from him and waited. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said finally, "about everything that happened, how it all fell apart so fast." He shook his head slowly. "I keep trying to understand it, how my life just collapsed." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. It was a lot of things coming together at once. Bad luck. That's what I thought at first, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized that luck doesn't explain everything. He looked up at me, and his eyes were clearer than I had seen them in months. "Somebody helped it happen, Marcus. Somebody who knew things about me that they shouldn't have known." I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "The anonymous tip to HR," he continued. "The call to Caitlin. The way the senior executive suddenly seemed to know about my anxiety medication, my debt, things I hadn't told anyone at the company." He leaned forward. Someone was watching me, someone who had access to my life in ways that an outsider wouldn't. I opened my mouth to deny it, to offer some alternative explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Nathan's expression shifted. Something crossed his face. Not anger, but something worse. Recognition. "I've been going through it all in my head," he said quietly. "Trying to figure out who would do this to me, who had the opportunity, who had the motive." His voice cracked slightly, and I kept coming back to the same answer, even though I didn't want to believe it. "Nathan, was it you?" The question hung in the air between us, and I could feel my entire life balanced on the edge of my response. I could lie. I was good at lying. I had proven that over the past 2 years. I could deny everything, insist that he was paranoid, suggest that his judgment had been compromised by everything he'd been through. He couldn't prove anything. The anonymous tips had been untraceable. The call to Caitlin had been from a burner phone. I had been careful, but looking at my brother's face in that dingy diner, seeing the desperate hope that I would tell him he was wrong, that his little brother hadn't betrayed him so completely, I couldn't do it. I couldn't add another lie to the mountain of lies I had already told. "Yes." One word. It came out barely above a whisper, but Nathan heard it. His face went white. "Oh God," he said. "Oh God, Marcus." And then he started to cry. I had never seen my brother cry. Not when our grandmother died. Not when he broke his collarbone in a high school football game. Not even when his marriage ended. Nathan was the strong one, the composed one, the one who held everyone else together when things fell apart. Watching him break down across from me in that vinyl booth was like watching a building collapse. Slow at first, then all at once. Devastating. "Why?" He could barely get the word out. "Why would you do that to me?" I told him everything. I don't know why. Maybe I had been carrying the weight for so long that I couldn't hold it anymore. Or maybe I owed him at least the truth after everything I had taken from him. But I told him about the envy that had poisoned my entire life, about the way I had always felt invisible next to him, about the Christmas dinner where something inside me broke, and about the 18 months of calculated destruction that followed. I told him about finding his email, about my surveillance of his life, about the anonymous tips and the call to Caitlin. I told him that I had known exactly what I was doing, and I had done it anyway. And I told him that I was sorry, so sorry that the word felt inadequate, like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. Nathan listened to all of it. His crying stopped somewhere in the middle, replaced by a stillness that was almost worse. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. "I trusted you," he said finally. "More than anyone. You were my little brother. I thought—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I thought we were on the same team." I know we were." "No." His voice hardened. "You don't get to say that. You didn't act like we were on the same team. You acted like we were enemies. You weaponized everything I ever told you, everything you ever saw. You destroyed my marriage, my career, my reputation." He laughed bitterly. "And you did it because you were jealous, because you didn't feel special enough?" When he put it that way, it sounded even worse than it had in my own head. "I was sick," I said. "I don't mean that as an excuse. I know there's no excuse. But I was sick with something I never dealt with, and it rotted me from the inside out. Do you think that makes it better?" "No, I don't think anything makes it better." Nathan stood up abruptly. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk out, and I wouldn't have blamed him. But he didn't leave. He stood there, looking down at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness. That would have been too much to hope for. But something else. Weariness, maybe. A resignation to the reality of what had happened. "I used to wonder what I did wrong," he said. "Why my life imploded like that. I tortured myself trying to figure out what mistake I had made, what karma I was paying off." He shook his head. "And it was you. The whole time it was my own brother. Nathan, Don't." He held up a hand. "I can't hear any more apologies right now. I can't process any of this right now." He pulled out his wallet and dropped a 20 on the table. "I'm going to go home. I need time to think about what happens next." "What does that mean?" He looked at me with eyes that held no warmth, none of the brotherly affection I had taken for granted my entire life. "It means I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. It means I don't know if our relationship can survive this. It means that you're going to have to live with what you did, and I'm going to have to decide whether I can live with you." He walked out of the diner. I sat there for another hour, drinking cold coffee and staring at the space where he had been. The next few weeks were the worst of my life. I existed in a state of constant dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be Nathan, telling me he was going to our parents, or to a lawyer, or to the press. But the call never came. Instead, silence. Nathan didn't reach out, didn't respond to my tentative messages, didn't appear at family gatherings. Our mother kept asking if I knew what was going on with him, why he had become even more withdrawn than before, and I made excuses while the guilt ate me alive. A month after our conversation at the diner, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I had done. I couldn't give Nathan back his career, his marriage, his reputation. The past was immutable, fixed, beyond my ability to change. But I could at least stop hiding. I called a family meeting. Our parents, Nathan, me. I told them it was important, that there was something I needed to say. Our mother thought I was going to announce an engagement or a new job. The hope in her voice almost made me back out. Almost. We gathered in our parents' living room on a Saturday afternoon, the same room where I had made my terrible decision 4 years earlier. Nathan was there, though he wouldn't look at me. Our parents were confused, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. I told them everything. I told them that I had been the one to bring Nathan down, that I had discovered his secrets and weaponized them, that the collapse of his career, his marriage, his life, it was my fault. Our mother's face went through a transformation that I will never forget. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to horror, then to a grief so profound that it aged her 10 years in 10 seconds. Our father didn't say anything. He just stared at me like he had never seen me before. "I'm not telling you this, so you'll forgive me," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. "I know there might not be forgiveness for what I did. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth, and because Nathan has been carrying this alone, and that's not fair." Nathan finally looked at me. I couldn't read his expression. It was somewhere between surprise and something that might have been the first stirring of respect. "I'm also telling you because I've realized something," I continued. "The person I became, the things I did, that's not who I want to be. And the only way I can start becoming someone different is if I stop hiding from what I've done." The silence that followed my confession seemed to last forever. Then our mother stood up, walked to where Nathan was sitting, and wrapped her arms around him. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me at all. She just held her older son and murmured something I couldn't hear. Our father remained in his chair, still staring at me with that unreadable expression. "You need to leave," he said finally. His voice was quiet, controlled, but I could hear the tremor beneath the calm. "You need to leave this house, and you need to give us time to process what you've just told us." I nodded. I had expected nothing less. I stood up to go, and as I reached the doorway, Nathan's voice stopped me. "Marcus." I turned around. "What you did," he said, "was unforgivable. I want you to understand that. I may never be able to look at you without seeing the person who destroyed my life." I nodded again, accepting the truth of his words. "But," he paused, seeming to struggle with what came next, "the fact that you told the truth, that you didn't try to keep hiding, that means something. I don't know what it means yet. I don't know if it changes anything, but it means something." I left my parents' house that afternoon, and I didn't hear from any of them for 3 months. Those 3 months were a different kind of hell than the one I had experienced before. Instead of the guilt of hiding, I now faced the consequences of exposure. I had traded secret shame for open judgment, and I wasn't sure which was worse. I threw myself into therapy with an intensity I had never managed before. I found a new therapist, someone who specialized in family dynamics and the kind of deep-seated issues that had driven my behavior. I told her everything, held nothing back, and let her help me excavate the foundations of my jealousy. What we found was not pretty. A childhood spent feeling invisible. Parents who loved me but were overwhelmed by their own lives, who didn't have the emotional bandwidth to give me the individual attention I craved. A brother whose effortless success became the standard against which I measured myself, a standard I could never meet. None of this excused what I had done. My therapist was clear about that, and I understood it myself. But understanding the roots of my behavior gave me a framework for change. I could see, finally, the distorted thinking that had led me down such a destructive path. I had believed that there was only so much success, so much love, so much recognition in the world, and that Nathan's abundance meant scarcity for me. I had seen our relationship as a zero-sum game, where his gain was my loss, but that wasn't true. It had never been true. There was room for both of us to succeed, both of us to be loved, both of us to be seen. The only thing that had made it impossible was my own poisoned perception. By the time my mother called, I had begun the slow work of becoming someone different. She wanted to see me, she said, not at the house, that would take more time, but at a coffee shop near her yoga studio. Just the two of us. I agreed, my heart in my throat, and spent the next 2 days rehearsing what I would say. When I saw her, she looked tired. There were new lines on her face that I hadn't noticed before, and her eyes held a sadness that I knew I had put there. "I've been talking to Nathan a lot these past few months," she said after we had settled into a corner booth. "Trying to understand what happened, what really happened, not just the parts we could see from the outside." I nodded, waiting. He told me things about your childhood that I didn't know, or maybe things I knew but didn't want to see. She shook her head. "Marcus, I never meant to make you feel invisible. I never meant for you to think you were less loved or less important than your brother." "I know, Mom." "Do you? Because looking back, I can see how it might have seemed that way. Nathan was our first, and we were so wrapped up in every milestone, every moment. By the time you came along, we thought we knew what we were doing. We weren't as attentive, as present. We took so much for granted." Her eyes filled with tears. "That was our failure, and I'm so sorry for it." I felt something crack open inside me. Some old, hardened place that I had protected for so long, I had forgotten it was there. "Mom, what I did, it wasn't because of you. It was because of me. I made choices, terrible choices. You and Dad aren't responsible for that. Maybe not entirely, but we're not blameless either." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not saying I forgive you for what you did to Nathan. That's not mine to give. It's his. But I'm saying that I love you, Marcus, despite everything, and I want to find a way for our family to heal." We talked for 2 hours. We cried. We said things that should have been said decades ago. And when I left that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. It's been 2 years since that conversation. 2 years of slow, painful rebuilding. My relationship with my parents has recovered, though it's different now. More honest, more aware of the cracks that were always there, even if we didn't talk about them. We've had family therapy sessions together, something I never would have imagined before everything happened. And we're learning how to be a family in a healthier way. My relationship with Nathan is more complicated. He started talking to me again, which is more than I expected and less than I hoped for. We've had coffee a few times, stiff and awkward conversations where we dance around the elephant in the room. He's been clear that he doesn't know if he'll ever fully forgive me, and I've accepted that as his right. But he's also told me that he's been doing his own work. Therapy to deal with the trauma of what I did to him, but also to confront the things he had been hiding, the affair, the lie about the client's situation, the facade he maintained for so long. He said that in a strange, terrible way, the destruction of his old life has given him the chance to build a new one on a more honest foundation. He's dating someone new, a woman named Claire, who knows his full history, the good and the bad, and loves him anyway. He's working as a consultant now, a lower-profile career, but one where he seems genuinely happy. And he started speaking to groups about imposter syndrome and the pressure to maintain appearances, using his own story as a cautionary tale. He hasn't forgiven me, but he's finding his way towards something that might be even more valuable, a life that's authentically his, rather than the performance he maintained for so long. And me? I'm still at the same company, though I no longer measure my success against anyone else's. The promotion I thought I wanted, the VP position that I imagined would finally make me feel worthy, it doesn't hold the same appeal anymore. I do good work. I contribute to my team. And when I go home at night, I can look at myself in the mirror without flinching. I still see my therapist every week. I probably will for a long time. The patterns of thought that led me to do what I did, they don't disappear overnight. They're embedded deep, and uprooting them is the work of years, maybe a lifetime. But I'm doing the work. For the first time in my life, I'm doing the actual work instead of looking for shortcuts. I don't know if Nathan and I will ever be close again. I hope so, but I've learned to let go of expectations, to allow things to unfold without trying to control them. Whatever our relationship becomes, it will be what it is, not what I want it to be, not what I think it should be, just what it actually is. I started this confession by saying that I destroyed my brother's life. And I did. But what I've learned in the 2 years since is that destruction isn't always the end of the story. Nathan's life was destroyed, and from the ruins, he's building something new, something that might even be better than what he had before, because it's real. Because he's no longer hiding. My life was destroyed too, the version of it that was built on envy and comparison and the desperate need to be better than my brother. That life is gone, and I don't miss it. In its place, I'm building something smaller, quieter, more honest, a life that's about who I actually am, rather than who I wanted to be in relation to someone else. I used my brother's secrets against him to get ahead. That's a sentence I'll carry with me forever, a truth I can never escape or undo. But I've stopped trying to escape it. I've stopped looking for absolution or forgiveness. or some resolution that makes me feel okay about what I did. I did something terrible. I hurt someone I love. And now I'm trying to be better. That's all any of us can do, in the end. Face the truth of what we've done, accept the consequences, and try, every single day, to be better than we were before. I don't know if Nathan is listening to this. I don't know if he'll ever hear these words, but if he does, I want him to know. I'm sorry. I was wrong. And I'm grateful, so grateful, for every conversation we've had since, for every inch of ground we've reclaimed, for every moment you've given me that I didn't deserve. You were always my big brother. You still are. And I'm finally ready to stop competing and start being the brother you deserved all along. It's not too late. I have to believe that it's not too late. And if you're listening to this, if you're someone standing at a crossroads like the one I faced, please choose the other path. The jealousy, the resentment, the desire to tear someone else down so you can rise. It feels like it will fill the hole inside you, but it won't. It will only make the hole deeper. Choose honesty instead. Choose to face your own inadequacies instead of projecting them onto others. Choose to do the hard work of becoming someone you can respect, rather than taking the shortcut of diminishing someone else. I chose wrong. I chose destruction and betrayal and 17 months of calculated cruelty. And I've spent every day since trying to undo the damage, knowing that some of it can never be undone. Don't be me. Be better. And if you've already made the wrong choice, if you're living with the weight of something you've done, hiding it, drowning in it, know that there's another way. The truth is terrifying, but it's also the only path toward redemption. Confession doesn't erase what you've done. It doesn't earn you forgiveness or absolution or a clean slate, but it gives you something that hiding never can. The chance to start becoming someone different, someone honest, someone who faces their failures instead of running from them. That's where I am now. Not redeemed, not forgiven, but trying. Always trying. And that's going to have to be enough.